My own mom said, "You are just a worthless investment compared to your sister." I stood tall and said, "Consider this investment fully liquidated. Live your lives as though there was never a daughter named Marlowe." They went silent. The whole party froze. The cold in Chicago is not just a season. It is a physical presence. It is a sharp, unforgiving entity that whips off Lake Michigan, cutting through wool coats and designer scarves, settling deep into your bones until you forget what warmth feels like. But I can tell you right now, with absolute certainty, that the most brutal winter wind in this city is nothing compared to the absolute, freezing void I saw in my mother's eyes on the night I finally shattered our family into a million irreparable pieces. My name is Marlowe. I am 28 years old, and I work as a turnaround strategist for one of the most ruthless private equity firms in the Midwest. My entire professional life is dedicated to looking at disasters. I walk into failing, bleeding companies, strip away the rot, liquidate the dead weight, and force them back into profitability. I deal with logic. I deal with numbers. I deal with the cold, hard reality of consequences. Right now, as I stand in my luxury high-rise apartment overlooking the glittering skyline, holding a heavy crystal glass of sparkling water, everything looks perfectly curated. The custom furniture, the minimalist art on the walls, the quiet hum of the climate control. It is the exact picture of a successful, independent woman who has conquered the corporate world. But if you look closely at my right hand, right near the base of my thumb, you will see a pale, jagged scar. It is a permanent reminder of a time when I worked 3 back-to-back shifts in a greasy diner kitchen, accidentally burning myself on an industrial deep fryer just so I could afford to pay my own college tuition while simultaneously funding the luxurious delusion that was my family. For 28 years, I was the invisible beast of burden. I was the financial safety net, the emergency fund, the scapegoat, and the emotional punching bag for 3 people who viewed my existence entirely as a means to an end. My mother, Lenora, was a woman completely obsessed with the illusion of high society, despite having the actual bank account of a substitute teacher. My father, Harrison, was a weak, easily manipulated man who compensated for his own profound failures by acting like a tyrant toward me. And then there was Cressida, my younger sister, the golden child, the center of their fabricated universe. Cressida was 25, living in Los Angeles, pretending to be a wealthy lifestyle influencer on the internet while contributing absolutely nothing of actual value to society. To them, Cressida was an asset. She was beauty, she was potential, she was the lottery ticket that was eventually going to marry rich and elevate them all to the lifestyle they fundamentally believed they deserved. And me? I was just the infrastructure. I was the unseen, unappreciated foundation meant to quietly crumble under the weight of their towering expectations. I was expected to be smart enough to make 6 figures, but submissive enough to hand it all over without a single question. They demanded absolute loyalty while offering nothing but pure, unadulterated contempt in return. My colleagues see me as a force of nature. My boss, Alaric, a man who terrifies corporate boards with a single glance, trusts me to handle multi-million-dollar portfolios because he knows I do not let emotion cloud my judgment. My best friend and coworker, Theron, constantly jokes that I have ice water in my veins instead of blood. But they did not know the truth. They did not know the exhausting, humiliating double life I was leading. By day, I was dismantling corrupt corporations. By night, I was sitting on my expensive couch, shaking with anxiety as I reviewed the terrifyingly high credit card statements my parents kept sending me to pay. I was brilliant at saving companies, but I was tragically, pathetically blind when it came to saving myself from the people who shared my DNA. I always justified it. I told myself that family was complicated. I told myself that if I just worked a little harder, earned a little more money, bought them a nicer gift, or paid off just one more massive debt, they would finally look at me the way they looked at Cressida. I thought I could buy their love. I thought my sheer usefulness would eventually translate into basic human respect. I was the smartest person in any boardroom I walked into, but at the dinner table with my parents, I was just a desperate, foolish little girl begging for scraps of affection. But every parasite eventually kills its host if left unchecked. The breaking point was never going to be a quiet, peaceful realization. It was always going to be an explosion. The night of my promotion dinner was supposed to be my crowning achievement. It was supposed to be the moment I finally proved my worth to them. Instead, it became the exact moment I realized that my worth to them was strictly numerical, and even then, it was never going to be enough. Before I can tell you exactly how I executed the most clinical, devastating, and entirely legal financial destruction of my own blood relatives, you have to understand the deeply rooted sickness of our history. You have to walk through the museum of my pain, look at the exhibits of their cruelty, and understand exactly why, when the moment finally came, I felt absolutely no mercy. Are you ready to see how a family destroys itself from the inside out? To truly grasp the magnitude of the betrayal, we have to go back to the beginning. Growing up in our supposedly quiet suburban home felt like living in a theater where the play was already cast, the script was already written, and I was permanently assigned the role of the stagehand while Cressida was the undisputed star. If you want to understand the exact flavor of my childhood, let me present the first exhibit in my personal museum of pain. I was 16 years old. I had spent 4 agonizing months preparing for the state debate championship. I stayed up until 3 in the morning every single night, reading heavy political science books, practicing my arguments in front of a cracked bathroom mirror until my throat was completely raw. When the day of the final tournament arrived, it was pouring rain. A heavy, miserable downpour. I won first place. I held that heavy gold trophy in my hands, feeling a surge of pure, electric pride. I thought, finally, this is it. This is the moment they will be proud of me. I stood outside the high school gymnasium in the freezing rain, holding my trophy under my jacket to keep it dry, waiting for my father to pick me up. I waited for 2 hours. My clothes were completely soaked through. My teeth were chattering so hard my jaw ached. Finally, I started walking. I walked 3 miles home in the pouring rain. When I pushed open the front door, shivering and completely exhausted, the house was warm and smelled like expensive takeout. My mother, Lenora, was sitting on the couch, carefully painting Cressida's toenails. My father, Harrison, was watching television. I stood in the doorway, dripping water onto the hardwood floor, and pulled out the gold trophy. I said I won. I won the whole state championship. My mother did not even look up. She just sighed, a heavy, irritated sound. She said, "Marlowe, please do not drip puddle water on the good rug. Your sister had a very exhausting day. Your father had to drive her all the way across town for an audition for a local ice cream commercial. She is very stressed because the casting director was rude to her. Could you go make us some tea?" I stood there, staring at them. An ice cream commercial. An audition she did not even get. That was deemed vastly more important than a state academic championship. I took my trophy, walked up to my small room, and shoved it into the back of my closet under a pile of old sweaters. I never mentioned it again. That was the day I learned the fundamental rule of our household. My massive triumphs were completely irrelevant inconveniences, while Cressida's minor inconveniences were national tragedies. But the emotional neglect was just the warm-up act. The real exploitation, the calculated, systemic bleeding of my resources, began the moment I turned 18 and left for college. My parents sat me down at the kitchen table and delivered the news with practiced, solemn faces. They told me that because of the economy and because Cressida needed expensive private vocal lessons to pursue her dreams, there was absolutely zero money for my college tuition. Not a single dime. They told me it was time for me to be an adult and figure it out. So, I figured it out. I took out a mountain of high-interest student loans that felt like a physical weight crushing my chest. I got a job working the graveyard shift at a massive warehouse, hauling boxes until my back felt like it was splitting in two. Then I would sleep for 3 hours, go to my advanced finance classes, and immediately go to my second job at a greasy diner off campus. I smelled permanently of stale coffee, industrial bleach, and deep fryer oil. I had dark, purple circles under my eyes that never went away. I survived on cheap instant noodles and the leftover dinner rolls the diner manager let me take home at midnight. During my junior year, when I was already stretched so thin I thought I might actually die from sleep deprivation, the phone calls started. It was always my mother, and it was always a crisis. The biggest crisis was Aunt Vesper. Vesper was my mother's older sister. A dramatic, perpetually complaining woman who lived in a neighboring state. My mother called me one Tuesday evening, sobbing hysterically into the receiver. She told me Aunt Vesper had developed a severe, life-threatening heart condition. She said the medical bills were piling up, the insurance was denying coverage, and if the family did not step up and help, Vesper was going to die. She laid the guilt on thicker than concrete. She said, "Marlowe, you're the smart one. You are the one who knows how to make money. We need you to help. Family helps family." I was 20 years old. I was terrified. Despite everything, the lifelong programming kicked in. I believed them. I told myself this was a genuine matter of life and death. So, I took on a third job. I started doing freelance accounting and tax preparation for local small businesses late at night. I completely stopped buying anything for myself. I wore shoes with holes in the soles. I skipped meals. And every single month, on the first day of the month, I wired exactly $3,500 to a joint bank account my parents had set up specifically for Aunt Vesper's medical fund. Do the math. $3,500 a month. That is $42,000 a year. From a college student. I bled for that money. I literally sacrificed my youth, my health, and my sanity for that money. I missed out on every single college experience. No parties, no networking events, no dating. Just work, study, wire the money, repeat. I thought I was keeping my aunt alive. I thought I was finally earning my place in the family. I thought I was being a good daughter. Meanwhile, Cressida was attending a moderately expensive, completely useless private arts college in California, fully funded by my parents. She posted daily photos of herself drinking expensive iced lattes, wearing brand new designer clothes, and going to exclusive beach parties. When I asked my father how they could afford all of that for Cressida, while Aunt Vesper was supposedly dying, he snapped at me. He said, "Cressida has to maintain an image for her career, Marlowe. You would not understand. You just sit behind a desk with a calculator. You do not need nice things." I swallowed the anger. I pushed it down deep into the dark, locked box inside my mind. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that once I graduated and got a real corporate job, everything would balance out. I was so naive. I did not realize that by sending them that money, I was not buying their love. I was simply training them to view me as an endless, unquestioning source of revenue. Have you ever had to parent your own parents? Have you ever had to carry the financial weight of adults who refuse to carry themselves? Let me know in the comments below, because I need to know I am not the only one who fell for this trap. I always thought I was saving my family. Right up until the moment my best friend showed me the devastating, irrefutable truth. The absolute worst kind of betrayal does not come with a loud warning siren. It sneaks up on you in the middle of a perfectly ordinary day, disguised as something completely innocent. For me, the entire foundation of my reality collapsed on a rainy Thursday afternoon inside a loud, crowded coffee shop in downtown Chicago. I was sitting across from Saskia. Saskia and I went to college together. While I was burying myself in finance and economics, she was becoming a terrifyingly brilliant cybersecurity expert. She was the kind of person who could find out your entire life history with just a laptop and 20 minutes of free time. I had been venting to her about how exhausted I was. I had just been promoted to a senior management role at the firm, making an incredible salary, but my bank accounts were still struggling to grow because my parents were constantly calling with new emergencies. A broken water heater. A sudden tax hike. And of course, Aunt Vesper's never-ending, mysterious heart medications. Saskia sat there quietly, sipping her dark roast coffee, her sharp eyes studying my exhausted face. She did not offer me empty sympathy. Instead, she opened her sleek silver laptop, turned the screen toward me, and said, "Marlowe, you need to look at this right now. Please do not freak out, but I need you to look at the math." On the screen was Cressida's public Instagram page. Cressida had recently rebranded herself as a luxury travel influencer. The screen was filled with bright, heavily filtered photos of Cressida posing on a pristine white sand beach, holding a glass of champagne on a massive yacht, and standing in the lobby of an incredibly famous, ridiculously expensive 7-star hotel in Dubai. I stared at the photos, a heavy, sinking feeling forming in the pit of my stomach. How on earth is she affording a trip to Dubai? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She does not even have a real job. Her influencer career makes almost zero actual revenue. Saskia pulled up a secondary window on her screen. It was a complex spreadsheet. She had cross-referenced the dates of Cressida's extravagant trips, her designer purse purchases, and her high-end restaurant check-ins over the past 3 years with the exact dates I had been wiring money to my parents' supposed emergency medical fund. Look at the metadata, Saskia said, pointing a finger at the screen. The exact week you wired an extra $5,000 because your mom said Aunt Vesper needed a specialized cardiac scan? Cressida posted a photo from a first-class flight to Paris. The month you worked double shifts to send them $10,000 for a supposed emergency surgery deposit? Cressida bought a limited-edition Chanel bag and stayed at a luxury resort in the Maldives. The numbers lined up perfectly. To the exact dollar. It was not a coincidence. It was a highly calculated, systematic diversion of funds. But the absolute, undeniable nail in the coffin was a screenshot Saskia had captured from the comment section of one of Cressida's Dubai yacht photos. It was a comment from Aunt Vesper's official Facebook account. The woman who was supposedly bedridden with a failing heart had commented, "Looking gorgeous, sweetie. You shine so bright, all thanks to my share. Enjoy the sun." My share. The words hit me like a physical blow to the head. The air completely left my lungs. The coffee shop around me faded into a dull, rushing roar. Aunt Vesper was not dying. She was never dying. She was a willing accomplice. She was a decoy, acting as the tragic excuse to extract money from me, and in return, my parents were likely giving her a cut of the profits for playing along. I had been starving myself, destroying my youth, and crying myself to sleep from the sheer stress of trying to keep my aunt alive, while my entire family was using my blood money to fund a fake, luxurious internet lifestyle for the golden child. I did not scream. I did not cry. The sheer magnitude of the manipulation was so massive, so profoundly evil, that it bypassed my emotions completely and triggered the cold, analytical part of my brain. The part of my brain that dismantled corrupt companies for a living. I closed Saskia's laptop. I took a deep, shaky breath and I said, "Saskia, I need you to run a full, deep background check on my own social security number. Right now." Saskia did not ask questions. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. 10 minutes later, the second bomb dropped. I had been planning to buy my first piece of real estate. A beautiful, modern condo overlooking the Chicago River. I had been meticulously saving the small amount of money I kept for myself to build a solid down payment. But when Saskia pulled up my comprehensive credit report, my heart completely stopped. Hanging like a massive, toxic cloud over my clean financial history was a massive, defaulted line of credit. $85,000. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes scanning the details. The account had been opened 6 years ago, right around the time I turned 22. The primary signature on the digital application was mine, but the secondary authorized user, the person who had actually drained the entire $85,000 limit, was my father, Harrison. He had stolen my identity. He had used my social security number, forged my signature, and opened a massive commercial credit line to act as a silent guarantor for one of Cressida's failed early attempts at starting a boutique public relations agency. When the business inevitably crashed and burned because Cressida refused to actually work, my father had simply abandoned the debt. He left it sitting there, quietly rotting away, attached directly to my name, completely destroying my debt-to-income ratio without me ever knowing. They did not just steal my cash. They stole my future. They had intentionally chained me to their financial ruin so I could never fly away. Saskia looked at me, her eyes wide with genuine horror. "Marlowe, this is a massive federal crime. You need to call the police." You need to call a lawyer right now. We can prove fraud. I stared at the glowing screen for a long, quiet moment. The little girl inside me, the one who just wanted her parents to be proud of her debate trophy, finally died. She took her last breath in that noisy coffee shop, and in her place, a cold, calculating, utterly ruthless strategist took complete control. No, I said, my voice eerily calm. If I call the police now, they will just play the victims. They will cry and manipulate the system. They will find a way to drag the legal process out for years. I am not going to give them the luxury of a slow defeat. Saskia frowned. Then what are you going to do? They think I am just a stupid, obedient ATM, I replied, staring out the window at the busy Chicago street. They think I am a fool. But they forgot what I do for a living. I dissect bankrupt, corrupt entities and tear them apart piece by piece. My family is just another corrupt company. And I am going to be the one to liquidate them. But I am going to do it in a way they will never, ever see coming. I did not confront them. I went home, packed a small overnight bag, and continued to play my part perfectly. I had a massive promotion dinner coming up. A dinner I had already paid for, flying them all out to Chicago first class. I decided I was going to let them eat their expensive steaks. I was going to let them drink the fine wine. Because I knew it was going to be their last meal on my dime. The night of my promotion dinner arrived wrapped in a bitter, freezing Chicago wind, but inside the exclusive private dining room of the Wellington, the atmosphere was supposed to be warm and triumphant. The Wellington was the kind of establishment where the lighting was a soft, expensive gold, the steaks were aged for 90 days, and the waiters moved around the mahogany tables like silent, highly trained ghosts. I had booked this room 3 months in advance to celebrate my elevation to senior turnaround manager at the firm. It was a massive milestone. It came with a base salary that most people only dream of and a bonus structure that finally secured my financial independence. I had invited my closest allies. Alaric, my terrifyingly brilliant boss, sat near the head of the table, sipping a dark scotch. Theron, my sharp-witted colleague, was telling a sarcastic story about a recent corporate merger, making Saskia laugh into her champagne glass. They were my real family. The people who actually respected my mind and valued my presence. And then there were my biological anchors. I had paid for my parents and Cressida to fly first class from Los Angeles to Chicago. I had put them up in a luxury hotel downtown. I wanted them there not because I craved their love anymore. Saskia's revelation in the coffee shop had completely cured me of that pathetic delusion, but because I needed them in the room for the final act. I needed them to see the empire I was building before I locked them out of the gates forever. They arrived exactly 45 minutes late. No apologies. No congratulations. Cressida walked in wearing a backless designer gown that looked entirely inappropriate for a corporate dinner, holding her phone up to record a video for her followers as she entered. My mother, Lenora, immediately began complaining about the humidity in the city ruining her hair. My father, Harrison, aggressively pulled out a chair, completely ignoring Alaric's polite nod of greeting. The tension in the private room spiked instantly. Theron shot me a sympathetic look from across the table. I just offered a tight, diplomatic smile and signaled the waiter to start pouring the wine. I had specifically pre-ordered 3 bottles of an exceptional Grand Cru vintage, costing $800 a bottle. It was an extravagant expense, but I wanted the night to be flawless. The waiter delicately poured the ruby liquid into Cressida's crystal glass. She picked it up, took a tiny sip, and visibly wrinkled her nose in disgust. Ugh, she announced loudly, her voice piercing the polite conversation of my colleagues. This tastes like dirty water and old wood. Can I just get a vodka cranberry? This wine is totally off-brand for my aesthetic anyway. It doesn't look good on camera. Theron's jaw visibly tightened. Alaric slowly lowered his scotch glass, his piercing eyes locking onto Cressida with the kind of cold, analytical stare a biologist uses to examine a particularly annoying insect. My father quickly jumped in, completely oblivious to the heavy, insulting atmosphere his daughter had just created. Do not worry about the wine, Cressida, Harrison boomed, puffing out his chest. You only deserve the best. Actually, since we are all here celebrating success, I think this is the perfect time to make a little announcement of our own. He did not look at me. He looked directly at Alaric, as if trying to impress my billionaire boss with his fabricated importance. Our Cressida here is on the verge of something massive, Harrison continued, his voice echoing in the private room. She is about to sign a multi-million-dollar branding deal with a major cosmetics company. She is the real entrepreneur of the family. The visionary. I stared at my father, feeling a cold, dark amusement bubbling deep inside my chest. A multi-million-dollar branding deal. It was a spectacular, pathetic lie. I knew for a fact, thanks to Saskia's deep dive into their finances, that Cressida's influencer agency had dropped her 3 weeks ago due to breach of contract and failure to deliver content. She was bleeding money. They were all bleeding money. And they were looking directly at the only person who could stop the bleeding. Me. I had originally planned to use this dinner to announce something truly special. Despite the horrific $85,000 fraudulent debt my father had secretly anchored to my name, my massive promotion bonus had finally given me enough leverage to secure the mortgage on the riverfront condo I had been dreaming of. I was going to announce that I was officially a homeowner. I was going to plant my flag and claim my independence. But as I opened my mouth to speak, to try and reclaim my own celebration, my father aggressively cut me off. He leaned heavily across the table, knocking over a silver salt shaker, and pointed a thick finger directly at my face. And that brings me to why we are really here, Marlowe, Harrison said, his tone shifting from boastful to demanding in a fraction of a second. This promotion of yours is great timing. Your mother and I have been talking. Cressida needs a major cash injection to secure the legal fees for this massive cosmetics contract. You are making big corporate money now. We expect you to transfer exactly 50% of your new promotion bonus into the family trust account by Monday morning. It is the absolute least you can do to support your sister's empire. The entire table went dead silent. The soft jazz music playing from the hidden speakers suddenly felt incredibly loud. Saskia gripped her fork so hard her knuckles turned white. Theron looked like he was about to physically leap across the table and strangle my father. Alaric simply sat perfectly still, his eyes shifting from my father to me, waiting to see how I would handle the blatant, aggressive extortion happening in front of his senior staff. They were not asking. They were demanding. They had flown to my city, eaten my expensive food, insulted my colleagues, and were now publicly demanding half of the money I had nearly killed myself to earn, all to fund a lie. I looked at my father. I looked at Cressida, who was busy reapplying lip gloss in the reflection of her phone screen, completely unbothered by the fact that her father was currently trying to rob her sister blind. I did not yell. I did not cry. I picked up my linen napkin, dabbed the corners of my mouth, and prepared to deliver a highly calculated, polite refusal. But before I could even form the words, my mother, sensing that I was not immediately caving to their demands, decided to deploy the nuclear option. And in doing so, she handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy them all. The silence in the private dining room was heavy and suffocating. Theron, unable to stomach the blatant disrespect any longer, leaned forward. His voice was incredibly smooth, but laced with a lethal, cutting edge. With all due respect, Harrison, Theron said, looking my father dead in the eye, Marlowe earned that bonus by working 80-hour weeks and single-handedly restructuring a failing logistics company, saving 3,000 jobs in the process. Her intellect and her work ethic are the only reasons we are celebrating tonight. I hardly think demanding half her compensation to fund an Instagram account is appropriate dinner conversation. My mother, Lenora, physically recoiled as if she had been slapped. Her face turned a violent, blotchy shade of red. She could not handle anyone challenging her authority, and she absolutely could not handle anyone praising me over Cressida. She slammed her heavy silver fork down onto her expensive china plate. The loud, sharp clink echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. She turned her entire body toward me, completely ignoring Theron. Her eyes were wide, manic, and filled with a lifetime of unadulterated resentment. She was furious that she was losing control of the narrative in front of my powerful colleagues. She needed to put me back in my place. She needed to crush me. Why do you always have to make everything so difficult, Marlowe? Lenora hissed, her voice vibrating with pure venom. You surround yourself with these corporate snobs and suddenly you think you are better than your own blood. You sit behind a desk and crunch numbers all day. You have no creativity. You have no real spark. She paused, taking a sharp, ragged breath, letting the sheer cruelty of her next words build up in her chest. You cling to these little office contracts because you have nothing else, Lenora continued, her voice rising in volume until she was almost shouting. Look at your sister. She is a star. She has a real future. Compared to the brilliance of Cressida, you are nothing. You are just a walking ATM. You are a completely worthless investment. Honestly, looking at how exhausting and selfish you have become. I wish I had never given birth to you. The words hung in the air. Toxic. Heavy. Absolute. I wish I had never given birth to you. Saskia let out a small, horrified gasp, covering her mouth with both hands. Theron slowly stood up from his chair, his fists clenched tight by his sides, his face pale with fury. Alaric, a man who had negotiated billion-dollar mergers with ruthless cartels, looked genuinely, profoundly shocked by the sheer, naked evil of a mother saying that to her own child. In the movies, when a moment like this happens, there is usually crying. There is screaming. There is a desperate plea for understanding. But in reality, when the final, rusted chain that binds you to your abusers finally snaps, it does not make a loud noise. It is completely, perfectly silent. I felt a strange, icy calm wash over my entire body. The lingering anxiety, the heavy guilt, the desperate, lifelong need for my mother's approval simply evaporated into the cold Chicago air. I felt a physical sensation in my chest, like a massive, suffocating weight had been violently lifted. I looked at Lenora. I saw her for exactly what she was. A pathetic, small, deeply insecure woman who had spent 28 years trying to destroy my light because she was terrified of her own darkness. I did not feel like a victim. I felt like a god. I pushed my heavy mahogany chair back. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the floor. I stood up to my full height. I smoothed the front of my tailored blazer, keeping my movements slow, deliberate, and perfectly controlled. Every single eye in the room was locked onto me. My father looked slightly nervous, sensing the drastic, terrifying shift in my demeanor. Now, Marlowe, he stammered weakly, trying to regain control. Your mother is just stressed. Let's not make a dramatic scene in front of your boss. I ignored him completely. I looked directly down into my mother's eyes. The smug, victorious look on her face began to falter, replaced by a tiny, uncertain flicker of genuine fear. She had pushed me into a corner, fully expecting me to cower. She did not realize she had just pushed me out of my cage entirely. You think I am a worthless investment compared to my sister, I said. My voice was not loud. It was low, perfectly steady, and terrifyingly cold. It cut through the tension in the room like a surgical scalpel. Lenora swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. I just mean that you need to remember your obligations to this family, she muttered, her previous bravado shrinking under my unblinking stare. No, I interrupted, my voice ringing with absolute finality. I heard exactly what you meant. You have spent my entire life treating me like a bank. You lied about Aunt Vesper dying to steal $42,000 from me. You stole my social security number to take out an $85,000 commercial loan for Cressida. You bled me dry, and now you sit at my table, eating food I paid for, and tell me I am worthless. My parents froze. The color completely drained from my father's face as I explicitly mentioned the stolen social security number. He knew I knew. The jig was entirely up. Consider your wish granted, Lenora, I said, leaning slightly forward, delivering the final, fatal blow to our relationship. Consider this investment fully, permanently liquidated. Live your lives as though you never had a daughter named Marlowe. Because as of this exact second, you don't. I turned to Alaric and Theron. I am so incredibly sorry for the disruption, I said smoothly, reverting instantly to my professional persona. Please, finish your meals. The bill is fully taken care of. I will see you both in the office on Monday. I did not wait for a response. I did not look back at my family. I turned on my heel and walked out of the private dining room. I walked through the opulent main lobby of the Wellington, pushed through the heavy brass doors, and stepped out into the freezing, beautiful Chicago snow. I hailed a cab, climbed into the back seat, and pulled out my phone. The emotional execution was complete. Now it was time for the financial slaughter. The interior of the yellow taxicab smelled like old leather and strong pine air freshener. As the driver navigated through the slick, snow-covered streets of downtown Chicago, I sat in the back seat, bathed in the glow of my smartphone screen. I was operating with a terrifying, absolute efficiency. There were no tears. There was no hesitation. Just the swift, methodical dismantling of a 10-year financial dependency. First, I opened my primary banking application. I navigated to the automated transfer section. There it was, the recurring monthly wire of $3,500 to the joint family trust account. The blood money. I hit cancel. The screen prompted me to confirm the deletion. I pressed confirm. A small green checkmark appeared. Just like that, the main artery was severed. Next, I opened my credit card management portal. Over the years, I had foolishly provided my parents with 3 different emergency authorized user cards tied to my primary accounts. I pulled up the transaction histories. They had used them for luxury groceries in Los Angeles, expensive salon visits for Cressida, and exorbitant dinners. I deactivated all 3 cards simultaneously. Status: permanently closed. Finally, the most crucial step. I logged into the major credit bureaus. I initiated a total, ironclad security freeze on my Social Security number. No one could open a new account, secure a loan, or run a background check without a heavily encrypted PIN number that only I possessed. I also officially filed a preliminary dispute for the $85,000 fraudulent commercial loan my father had opened. I wasn't pressing criminal charges yet. I was just laying the groundwork. I was tightening the noose. By the time I unlocked the door to my quiet, immaculate apartment, my phone was aggressively vibrating. It was starting. The immediate, chaotic fallout. My father called 7 times in a row. My mother sent a barrage of text messages, alternating between screaming rage and pathetic, manipulative guilt trips. How dare you embarrass us in front of your boss? Turn the credit cards back on right now. Cressida is stranded at a restaurant. You are a selfish, ungrateful monster. Answer the phone. I placed the phone face down on the marble kitchen counter. I poured myself a glass of cold water, drank it slowly, and went to bed. I slept for 10 straight hours. It was the deepest, most peaceful, most uninterrupted sleep I had experienced in my entire adult life. The next morning, a Saturday, the enemy changed their tactics. Realizing that direct intimidation was no longer working, Lenora decided to deploy her flying monkeys. At exactly 9 in the morning, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed Aunt Vesper's name. I picked it up, putting it on speakerphone, simply to document the desperation. Marlowe, how could you do this to your own mother? Vesper wailed the absolute second the call connected. Her voice was shrill, theatrical, and dripping with fake sorrow. Lenora has been crying all night. Her blood pressure is dangerously high. You are going to give her a heart attack. You need to call the bank and fix whatever mistake you made with the transfers. We are a family. We forgive each other. Aunt Vesper, I said, my voice perfectly calm, devoid of any emotion. How is your severe heart condition doing these days? There was a sudden, extremely awkward pause on the other end of the line. Oh, well, the doctors say it is managing, Vesper stammered, clearly thrown off by my question. But the medications are still so terribly expensive, Marlowe. You know that. That is why your mother needs the money. I opened Saskia's email file on my laptop. I pulled up the exact screenshot of Vesper's comment on Cressida's Dubai yacht photo. The comment where she bragged about getting her share. That is incredibly fascinating, Vesper, I said, leaning back in my chair. Because I am looking at a very interesting piece of metadata right now. It seems that my emergency medical transfers directly funded my sister's luxury vacation to the United Arab Emirates. And I also have a beautiful screenshot of you commenting on her Instagram, publicly celebrating the cut of the stolen money you received for playing the role of a dying woman. The silence that followed was absolute. I could almost hear the blood draining from Vesper's face thousands of miles away. "So here is how this is going to work, Vesper," I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal whisper. "You are going to hang up this phone. You are never going to call, text, or email me again. If you or anyone else in that toxic, pathetic excuse for a family attempts to contact me, I will take this massive file of highly documented financial fraud and extortion, and I will hand it directly to a federal prosecutor. Tell Lenora the ATM is permanently destroyed. Have a wonderful weekend." I ended the call. I immediately blocked Vesper's number, my parents' numbers, and Cressida's number. I blocked them on every single social media platform. I erected an impenetrable digital fortress around myself. The Cold War had officially begun. They thought my silence was just a temper tantrum. They thought I would eventually feel guilty, break down, and come crawling back with a checkbook in my hand to beg for their forgiveness. They severely underestimated the monster they had created. They taught me how to survive in the freezing cold, and now they were shocked that I knew how to build a weapon out of ice. I returned to the office on Monday morning with a renewed, terrifying level of focus. Alaric called me into his massive corner office. He did not ask about the horrific scene at the restaurant. He did not offer pity. He simply looked at me, saw the absolute, unbreakable resolve burning in my eyes, and handed me the largest and most dangerous portfolio of my entire career. "Marlowe," Alaric said, sliding a thick black binder across his desk. "We are about to execute a massive, highly hostile acquisition of toxic debt from a failing credit union on the West Coast. I need my best strategist to lead the charge. I need someone who will not hesitate to ruthlessly liquidate the assets and crush the debtors. Are you ready?" I placed my hand firmly on the heavy binder. "I have never been more ready in my life, sir," I replied. I did not know it then, but that specific portfolio of West Coast debt was about to hand me the ultimate, poetic, and absolutely catastrophic weapon to destroy my family once and for all. They thought I was out of their lives. They had no idea I was about to become their absolute worst nightmare. Before we get to the massive, explosive revelation in Act 3 and the absolute financial ruin of Cressida's fake empire, I need you to do something for me. If you are enjoying this story of absolute karma and revenge, please hit that like button right now, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me what city you are watching from. Every single comment helps push this video to more people who might be dealing with toxic families of their own, and it shows them that they can fight back. Thank you so much for your support. Now, let's get back to the moment I discovered the ultimate secret hidden in the corporate files. 3 incredibly grueling, blissfully silent months passed after that disastrous dinner. My career at the private equity firm skyrocketed to heights I had previously only imagined. Without the constant, suffocating drain of my parents' manufactured emergencies, my bank account swelled. Without the late-night panic attacks induced by Aunt Vesper's fake heart conditions, my mind became razor-sharp. I was sleeping a full 8 hours a night. I was eating well. I was operating at a level of absolute peak performance, entirely focused on the massive West Coast debt acquisition project Alaric had handed me. We were targeting a specific, highly predatory regional bank based in Los Angeles. This bank was notorious for handing out extremely high-interest loans, massive commercial credit lines, and luxury auto leases to people who had absolutely no business holding that kind of debt. They funded the illusions of the desperate and the greedy. And now, they were drowning in their own toxic assets. Our firm swooped in, ruthlessly aggressive, and purchased their entire portfolio of defaulted loans for literal pennies on the dollar. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The Chicago sky outside my floor-to-ceiling office window was a heavy, overcast gray. I was sitting at my large oak desk, reviewing a dense spreadsheet of commercial foreclosures, when someone knocked rapidly on my heavy glass door. It was Cashin. Cashin was one of our senior internal auditors. He was a brilliant, incredibly detail-oriented guy who usually looked entirely unbothered by anything. But as he stepped into my office, his face was completely pale. He looked like he had just seen a ghost walking the corporate hallways. He was holding a remarkably thick, bright red legal folder wrapped tightly in thick black security bands. The red folder was our firm's internal code for extremely high-risk, immediately actionable hostile debt. Marlowe, Cashin said, his voice unusually tight. He walked over and placed the heavy red folder directly in the center of my desk. I need you to look at this file immediately. I was running the standard cross-reference checks on the newly acquired Los Angeles debt portfolio, mapping out the highest priority targets for our aggressive liquidation team, and these specific names tripped every single alarm in our internal database. I frowned, picking up my expensive pen and leaning forward. What is the issue, Cashin? Are we dealing with a massive corporate shell company? Did someone commit wire fraud? Cashin shook his head slowly, a deeply uncomfortable look crossing his face. No, Marlowe. It is not a shell company. It is a family trust. Specifically, it is your family. My heart completely stopped beating for one long, terrifying second. The air in my spacious office suddenly felt incredibly thin. I slowly reached out and pulled the black security bands off the thick red folder. I opened the heavy cover. The very first page was a master summary of multiple defaulted accounts. I scanned the names printed in stark black ink. Lenora. Harrison. Cressida. My eyes darted to the numbers. It was a complete, unmitigated financial bloodbath. There was a severely defaulted commercial lease for a luxury penthouse apartment in downtown Los Angeles. There were 6 different premium credit cards, all completely maxed out, accumulating terrifying late fees every single day. There was a massive, highly delinquent auto loan for a brand new, fully loaded Mercedes G-Class SUV registered to Cressida. And sitting right there in the middle of the disaster, glaring up at me like a venomous snake, was the exact $85,000 commercial loan my father had fraudulently opened using my Social Security number. I looked at the total aggregated debt column at the bottom of the page. $1.2 million. They were entirely bankrupt. Without my monthly wire transfers of $3,500 acting as a desperate life raft, their entire fabricated empire of cards had violently collapsed in less than 90 days. They had defaulted on absolutely everything. Cashin cleared his throat nervously. Marlowe, I know this is a massive conflict of interest. I can immediately take this specific file directly to the legal department. We can have another senior manager handle the aggressive liquidation of these assets. You do not have to touch this. I sat there, staring at the numbers, feeling a strange, intoxicating heat rising in my chest. The sheer, impossible irony of the situation was staggering. Out of all the predatory banks in the entire country, our firm had purchased the exact one holding the chains to my family's ruin. Just then, my desk phone rang. It was Alaric's private extension. I picked up the heavy receiver. Come to my office right now, Marlowe, Alaric commanded, his voice perfectly smooth. Bring the red folder Cashin just gave you. I walked down the long, quiet executive hallway, carrying the heavy file of my family's destruction. When I stepped into Alaric's massive corner office, he was standing by the window, looking out over the city. He turned around, gesturing for me to sit in one of the leather chairs across from his desk. I sat down, placing the red folder on the polished wood. Sir, I began, keeping my voice strictly professional. I have just been made aware of a significant personal connection to one of the accounts in the new Los Angeles portfolio. I assume you want me to officially recuse myself from this specific liquidation protocol. Alaric looked at me, a sharp, terrifyingly knowing smile playing on his lips. Recuse yourself? Marlowe, I did not accidentally buy this specific portfolio. I froze, my eyes widening slightly. What do you mean? Alaric walked over and leaned against the edge of his desk. The night of your promotion dinner, after you walked out of the restaurant, your father made the monumental mistake of aggressively yelling at me. He demanded to know how much I was paying you, and he explicitly threatened to sue our firm if we did not garnish your wages to pay for his fake public relations company. So, I did what I do best. I deployed our top corporate investigators to look into Harrison. He tapped the red folder with his index finger. I found out exactly where they banked. I saw the massive mountain of toxic, fraudulent debt they were carrying. And I saw the $85,000 loan anchored to your Social Security number. When I realized their corrupt regional bank was looking to offload their bad debt, I aggressively pushed our board to acquire the entire portfolio. I intentionally bought your family's financial ruin, Marlowe. I stared at the billionaire CEO, completely stunned by the sheer, calculating ruthlessness of the man. Why? I whispered. Because you are the most brilliant strategist I have ever hired, Alaric said, his voice dropping to a low, powerful register. But you have always had a blind spot. Your family. I bought this debt because I want you to be the one to execute it. I am giving you absolute, total legal authority over this entire file. I want you to look your abusers in the eye, not as a desperate daughter, but as their primary corporate creditor. I am handing you the executioner's axe. The question is, are you strong enough to swing it? I looked down at the red folder. The museum of my pain flashed through my mind. The rainy night with my debate trophy. The 3 grueling jobs. The $42,000 stolen for a fake heart condition. The look of pure disgust on Lenora's face when she called me a worthless investment. I looked back up at Alaric. The last lingering trace of the obedient, terrified little girl vanished forever. I did not just feel strong. I felt invincible. I will handle the liquidation personally, sir, I said, my voice completely cold. They will not get a single cent of settlement. Excellent, Alaric said, walking back around his desk. Because according to building security, they just walked into our main lobby. The timing was almost too perfectly cinematic. As I walked out of Alaric's corner office, clutching the heavy red folder that essentially contained the legal deed to my family's entire existence, my cell phone buzzed in my blazer pocket. It was the head receptionist down on the 40th floor. Her voice was frantic, hushed, and completely laced with panic. Miss Marlowe, I am so incredibly sorry to disturb you, the receptionist whispered rapidly. But there are 3 people down here in the main executive lobby causing a massive, highly disruptive scene. An older man, an older woman, and a younger woman wearing sunglasses indoors. They are aggressively demanding to see you. The older man is currently shouting at one of the security guards, claiming you are his daughter and that you are legally obligated to write them a massive corporate check right this second. It is getting very ugly. We have clients waiting in the lounge. Should I call the police and have them forcefully removed? I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still in the quiet hallway. My family had flown halfway across the country, tracked down the exact location of my highly secure private equity firm, and decided to launch a public, chaotic ambush in front of our high-net-worth clients. They were betting entirely on my fear of public humiliation. They thought that if they screamed loud enough, I would panic, pull out my checkbook, and pay whatever ransom they demanded just to make the terrible embarrassment go away. That was exactly how the old Marlowe would have reacted. The old Marlowe would have been sweating, shaking, and desperately begging them to lower their voices. But the woman standing in the hallway, holding the red folder, was a completely different entity. Do not call the police, I told the receptionist, my voice steady, slow, and dripping with an absolute, terrifying authority. I want you to escort all 3 of them into VIP conference room A. The one with the heavy soundproof glass. Do not offer them coffee. Do not offer them water. Lock the door from the outside once they are in, and tell them I will be down in exactly 10 minutes. I hung up the phone. I did not rush. I walked calmly to my private office. I carefully set the red folder down on my desk. I walked over to the mirror hanging on the back of my door. I straightened the lapels of my tailored Armani blazer. I checked my posture. I looked exactly like what I was, a lethal, highly compensated corporate assassin. Then, I picked up my desk phone and dialed the legal department. I asked for Calliope. Calliope was the firm's lead litigator and the absolute terrifying head of our aggressive debt recovery team. She was a woman who ate hostile bankruptcies for breakfast and destroyed fraudulent debtors for fun. Calliope, I said when she answered. I need you to join me in conference room right now. Bring your tablet. We have a highly hostile, immediate liquidation to execute. The targets are physically in the building. I walked down to the 40th floor. The heavy glass doors of conference room A were closed. I could see them through the frosted panels. Harrison was pacing back and forth like a trapped, angry animal, his face flushed red. Lenora was sitting in one of the expensive leather chairs, aggressively tapping her foot, looking around the luxurious room with a deeply chaotic mixture of ravenous greed and desperate panic. And Cressida was standing in the corner, chewing on her fingernail, her designer sunglasses pushed up on her head, looking completely, utterly terrified. Calliope walked up beside me, her high heels clicking sharply on the polished marble floor. She looked at the three people through the glass, then looked at the red folder in my hand. Are these the individuals associated with the massive Los Angeles fraud portfolio? Calliope asked, her voice entirely devoid of emotion. Yes, I replied smoothly. And they also happen to be my biological parents and my sister. Calliope's eyebrows raised a fraction of an inch. A slow, incredibly dark, predator's smile spread across her face. Oh, she purred. This is going to be exceptionally satisfying. Shall we go in? I pushed open the heavy glass doors. The sudden noise of the room hitting me. Harrison spun around the second I entered, immediately puffing out his chest to assume his fake, patriarchal authority. It is about damn time, Marlowe. Harrison yelled, taking an aggressive step toward me. Do you have any idea how much money we had to spend on last-minute flights to get here? You have been ignoring our calls for 3 months. Your selfish little temper tantrum is officially over. We are in a massive, catastrophic crisis, and you are going to fix it right now. I walked calmly to the head of the massive oak conference table. I did not pull out a chair. I did not sit down. I simply placed the thick red folder flat on the table, resting both of my hands on it. Calliope stood silently slightly behind my right shoulder, projecting an aura of pure, unadulterated legal menace. I looked at Cressida. Her hands were physically shaking. The confident, arrogant influencer who had complained about $800 wine at my dinner was completely gone. What exactly is the crisis, Harrison? I asked, intentionally using his first name. I watched him physically flinch at the profound disrespect. Cressida's manager, Lenora, blurted out, her voice cracking with sheer hysteria. He stole everything. That massive cosmetics contract was a complete scam. He drained her business accounts, took the advance money, and disappeared. The branding agency is suing us for breach of contract. The bank in Los Angeles is threatening to foreclose on the penthouse. They are going to repossess Cressida's car. Harrison violently slammed his hand flat on the oak table. You have to sell that fancy condo you just bought, Marlowe. He demanded, his face twisting in desperate rage. You have to liquidate your corporate stock options immediately. We need at least $400,000 by tomorrow morning to stop the banks from destroying us. You owe this family. You owe your sister. I stared at them. The sheer, mind-boggling audacity of their demands was breathtaking. They had orchestrated the theft of my money for years. They had stolen my identity. They had told me I was a worthless investment and wished I had never been born. And now, facing the total collapse of their fake empire, their immediate instinct was to demand I sell my own home to save them. They thought they were ambushing a weak, guilty daughter. They were about to find out they had locked themselves in a cage with a monster. The silence in the soundproof conference room was absolute. The frantic echoes of Harrison's aggressive demands faded into the thick walls. I stood at the head of the massive oak table, my hands resting calmly on the bright red folder. I looked at the three of them. I took my time. I let the immense, crushing power dynamic of the room slowly settle over their shoulders. I did not scream. I did not throw insults. I operated with the terrifying, surgical precision of a corporate executioner. Harrison, Lenora, please sit down, I said. My voice was perfectly flat, completely devoid of anger, sadness, or any recognizable familial warmth. Lenora's eyes widened. She hated being told what to do, especially by the daughter she viewed as inferior. Do not take that disrespectful tone with us, she snapped, her voice trembling slightly as she grabbed the back of a leather chair. We are not your employees. We are your parents. You are going to pull out your checkbook and you are going to write the check. I slowly opened the thick red folder. I meticulously pulled out the heavy stacks of legal documents and began spreading them out across the smooth oak table. I arranged them neatly. The foreclosure notices, the defaulted credit card statements, the massive auto loan agreement, and finally, right in the center, the $85,000 commercial loan bearing my forged signature. Let me explain a very harsh, very permanent reality to you, I began, keeping my eyes locked onto the documents. You are completely correct about one thing, Lenora. The regional bank in Los Angeles is indeed threatening a massive, ruinous lawsuit. The luxury dealership is absolutely preparing to violently repossess the Mercedes G-Class. Your premium credit cards are entirely, hopelessly defaulted. You are facing total bankruptcy. Cressida let out a small, pathetic whimper, clutching her designer purse to her chest like a shield. But, I continued, finally raising my eyes to meet my mother's, you are very, very confused about who exactly you owe all this money to. I tapped the stack of legal papers with my index finger. The sharp sound echoed in the quiet room. 3 days ago, this exact private equity firm, the elite firm where I am currently standing as a highly compensated senior manager, purchased a massive, multi-million-dollar portfolio of distressed, toxic debt from your specific regional bank in Los Angeles. We bought your debt in bulk, for pennies on the dollar, with the explicit, unyielding corporate goal of aggressive liquidation. The color completely vanished from Lenora's face. The transition was so sudden, so physically violent, it was like watching the blood being instantly drained from a corpse. It was the ultimate, shocking contrast. The woman who had proudly commanded the expensive restaurant, mocking my career, was now staring at me with genuine, unadulterated terror. Harrison took a frantic, stumbling step backward, physically bumping into the heavy glass door. What are you talking about? He stammered weakly, his arrogant facade completely shattering into a million jagged pieces. You are a consultant. You do not own the bank. I do not work for your bank, Harrison, I said, my voice rising slightly, echoing loudly and powerfully in the room. I am the senior executive exclusively in charge of auditing, managing, and liquidating this specific portfolio. I am the sole legal representative of your primary creditor. In the eyes of the law, I am the bank. My firm legally owns the lease to Cressida's penthouse. We legally own the maxed-out credit card debt. We legally own the auto loan. And I now possess the absolute, undeniable proof of the $85,000 identity theft you committed against me. Lenora's knees finally gave out. She collapsed heavily into the leather chair, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with horrific realization. The master manipulator had just realized that her lifelong victim was currently holding a loaded gun directly to the head of her entire fake empire. That is completely impossible, Harrison whispered, his hands shaking violently as he leaned over the table, desperately trying to read the legal letterhead on the documents. He saw his own messy signature. He saw the intimidating corporate logo of my firm firmly attached to the legal deed of assignment. The crushing reality crashed down on him like a physical ton weight. It is entirely possible, and it is entirely legal, I said, feeling an incredible, intoxicating rush of absolute, vindicating power flooding my veins. You flew across the country, marched into my building, and aggressively demanded my salary to pay off a faceless bank. But you are looking directly at the face of the bank. And I am telling you right here, right now, as your primary corporate creditor, that I am officially denying your pathetic request for a payment extension. I am officially denying your request for a settlement plan. Marlowe, please. Lenora suddenly gasped, bursting into loud, theatrical tears. She reached her hands out across the table toward me, desperately playing the victim card one last time. You cannot do this to us. We are your family. We will lose the penthouse. We will be out on the street. Cressida will go to jail for the breached contracts. If you are looking for sympathy, I said, leaning aggressively over the table, my face inches from hers, you should have shown me some when I was working 3 jobs and wearing shoes with holes in the soles to fund your fake heart condition and Vesper. Or when you looked me in the eye and told me I was a worthless investment. I straightened up, turning my back on my weeping mother, completely immune to her fake tears. My empathy was permanently dead. Calliope, I said, turning to the ruthless litigator standing beside me. "Yes, Miss Marlowe?" Calliope responded, her voice perfectly crisp. "Please initiate the immediate, forceful foreclosure on the Los Angeles properties. File the massive lawsuit for the completely defaulted balances by the end of business today. Offer them absolutely zero settlements. Prepare to aggressively garnish their wages for the rest of their natural lives. And formally prepare the criminal referral to the FBI regarding the $85,000 identity theft committed by Harrison." Harrison let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. Suddenly, Cressida, who had been completely frozen in the corner, seemed to snap back to reality. Her eyes darted wildly around the room. "The car," she whispered frantically. "The Mercedes. If I sell the car to a private dealer right now, I can get cash. I can run." She turned and sprinted toward the heavy glass doors of the conference room, her high heels slipping on the marble. She slammed her hand against the exit button and bolted out into the hallway, desperate to reach the underground parking garage where she had parked her ridiculously expensive, unpaid luxury SUV. I did not chase her. I did not even flinch. I simply looked at Calliope. Calliope smiled a cold, terrifying smile, lifted her sleek iPad, and tapped the screen once. "She is not going to get very far," Calliope said calmly. "If you were in my position right now, looking at the people who stole your life, would you have given them one last chance? Or would you have pulled the trigger just like I did? Let me know in the comments below, because what happened next in the parking garage was the absolute pinnacle of karma." Cressida was running. She was sprinting frantically through the polished, sterile hallways of our corporate office building, completely ignoring the shocked stares of our senior partners and wealthy clients. She burst into the private executive elevator, aggressively slamming her fist against the button for the underground VIP parking garage. Her entire fabricated reality was collapsing in real time, and her only thought was to physically escape with the single most valuable asset she had left, the customized, matte black Mercedes G-Class SUV. She intended to sell it on the black market, take the cash, and disappear. Calliope and I took the secondary elevator down, moving at a calm, deliberate pace. We did not need to run. When you own the chessboard, you do not need to chase the pawns. When the heavy metal doors of our elevator slid open, the echo of Cressida's hysterical screaming was already bouncing loudly off the concrete walls of the underground garage. We walked slowly around the corner to row C. The scene was an absolute masterpiece of modern karma. Cressida was physically on her knees on the cold, dirty concrete floor. Her expensive, backless designer gown was completely ruined, stained with black motor oil and dust. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her hands clutching her perfectly styled hair. Directly in front of her, the matte black Mercedes G-Class was already suspended high in the air. A massive, heavy-duty commercial tow truck, completely branded with the logo of our firm's most aggressive asset recovery contractor, had its steel hooks securely locked onto the rear axle of the luxury SUV. Two burly recovery agents in high-visibility vests were calmly securing the heavy chains. Calliope had tracked the GPS unit installed in the financed vehicle the absolute second my family walked into the lobby upstairs. She had dispatched the recovery team before I even opened the red folder in the conference room. "No, please stop," Cressida wailed, desperately grabbing the pant leg of one of the recovery agents. "You cannot take my car. I need that car for my brand. I am an influencer. You are ruining my life." The burly recovery agent simply looked down at her, completely unbothered, and gently pulled his leg free. "Sorry, lady," he grumbled. "Bank orders. Vehicle is officially in default." I stood 10 feet away, watching my golden child sister throw a literal temper tantrum on the floor of a parking garage. Harrison and Lenora arrived a moment later, bursting out of the stairwell, completely out of breath. They stopped dead in their tracks, watching their prized daughter's most valuable possession being violently repossessed. Harrison looked at me, his face completely devoid of any remaining arrogance. He looked incredibly old, incredibly small, and entirely broken. "Marlowe," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Please. I am begging you. I did not answer him. I turned to Calliope. Is the vehicle secured? I asked, my voice echoing clearly over Cressida's sobbing. Fully secured and ready for transport to the liquidation auction lot, Calliope confirmed, making a sharp note on her iPad. Excellent, I said. I turned around and walked back toward the elevator. I did not look back. I did not stay to watch them figure out how they were going to get to the airport without a car, without functioning credit cards, and without a single dime of my money to pay for a taxi. I left them entirely stranded in the cold, unforgiving reality they had built for themselves. The following weeks were a masterclass in aggressive, relentless corporate litigation. I handed the entire file over to Calliope's department with one strict, unbending directive: total, absolute liquidation. Offer no settlements. Accept no apologies. The legal machinery of the private equity firm ground their remaining assets into fine dust with terrifying speed. We successfully petitioned the federal courts and immediately began aggressive wage garnishment on the small, pathetic retirement accounts Harrison had desperately tried to hide. The luxury penthouse in Los Angeles was completely foreclosed on. The bank seized the property, changed the locks, and threw all of Cressida's designer clothes and fake influencer lighting equipment into the street. But the financial ruin was only the first phase of the punishment. The social execution was handled by Saskia. Saskia, still furious about the years of abuse I had suffered, took the massive, highly detailed file of Cressida's fake trips, the stolen money, and the fraudulent cosmetics contract, and anonymously leaked the entire thing to a prominent investigative journalist who specialized in exposing fake internet personalities. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning. The headline read, "The Golden Fraud: How a Luxury Influencer Built an Empire on Stolen Family Money." The story went massively, terrifyingly viral. It hit the front page of Reddit. It trended worldwide on Twitter. Millions of people read the explicit details of how Cressida had faked her Dubai trips using the money her sister bled for. The internet, famously unforgiving to fake influencers, completely destroyed her. Her followers evaporated overnight. Her comment sections were flooded with absolute outrage. The brands that had sent her free products publicly blacklisted her. The illusion was permanently, violently shattered. Harrison, facing the very real threat of a federal indictment for the $85,000 identity theft, was forced to accept a humiliating plea deal that completely drained what little dignity he had left. Lenora, the woman who had cared so desperately about her high society image, was forced to move into a tiny, incredibly run-down, one-bedroom apartment on the absolute outskirts of Los Angeles. They had lost the penthouse. They had lost the cars. They had lost their reputation. They had lost the golden child's future. They had lost absolutely everything. And I, sitting in my beautiful, quiet Chicago condo overlooking the river, drinking a cup of premium coffee, felt absolutely nothing but a profound, unshakable peace. The toxic tumor had been entirely, successfully removed. I thought the story was completely over. I thought the silence would simply stretch on forever. But exactly 1 month after the massive confrontation in the parking garage, the final, most sickening, and absolutely mind-blowing twist of the entire nightmare arrived directly at my office. It was a standard, cheap white envelope. There was no return address. Just my name written in messy, frantic blue ink. It was from Cressida. When I opened that letter and realized what was inside, any tiny, microscopic fragment of lingering guilt I might have subconsciously held for destroying them was instantly, permanently incinerated. The cheap white envelope sat on my heavy oak desk like a toxic hazard. I stared at the messy blue handwriting for a long time before I finally picked up a silver letter opener and sliced it open. Inside was a single piece of lined notebook paper and a small, black USB drive. The letter was written by Cressida. She was absolutely not writing to sincerely apologize for her years of entitled abuse. She was writing to aggressively deflect blame, exactly as she had been meticulously taught to do her entire pathetic life by our mother. She was cornered, desperate, and entirely willing to throw her own parents under the bus to save her own skin. "Marlowe," the frantic letter began. "You have to tell your lawyers to stop the massive lawsuits. I am working as a barista at a coffee shop making minimum wage. I can barely afford to eat. But you have to know, it absolutely wasn't my idea to take your hard-earned money for the trips. Mom and Dad planned the entire thing. They used me. I scoffed silently, reading the pathetic attempt at playing the victim. But the next paragraph made the blood in my veins run completely cold. 5 years ago, when you got your first big corporate bonus, Cressida's letter continued, Dad told Mom that if you saved enough of your salary, you would eventually buy your own real estate, build a massive savings account, and leave them completely behind. They explicitly, deliberately told me to ask for the expensive vacations and completely max out the premium credit cards so they could aggressively guilt you into paying for it all. Mom specifically said that if they kept your bank accounts entirely drained and kept you physically exhausted from working 3 jobs, you would never, ever have the energy or the financial independence to leave the family. I stopped reading. My hands were shaking slightly. They intentionally used me to keep you permanently trapped, Cressida wrote. They forged your signature on that $85,000 loan on purpose to destroy your credit score so no bank would ever let you buy a house. Listen to the USB drive. I secretly recorded them fighting about it after you cut off the money. Punish them, Marlowe, not me. I slowly set the piece of notebook paper down. I picked up the small black USB drive. I plugged it into the secure port on my computer. A single audio file popped up on the screen. I clicked play. The audio was slightly muffled, clearly recorded on a cell phone hidden in a pocket, but the voices were absolutely unmistakable. It was Harrison and Lenora, arguing in their kitchen shortly after the disastrous promotion dinner. I told you we pushed her too hard. Harrison's voice hissed angrily through the speakers. We should have just let her buy the damn condo. Now she froze the accounts. We are exposed. Do not raise your voice at me, Lenora snapped back, her voice dripping with pure, sociopathic malice. The plan was perfect. Keep the scapegoat poor, keep her exhausted, and she stays obedient. If she had a massive savings account, she would realize she does not need us. She is a workhorse, Harrison. Her entire purpose is to fund Cressida's future. That $85,000 loan on her credit report was supposed to be the anchor that kept her from ever leaving us. You just got sloppy with the paperwork. I reached out and hit pause. The silence in my office was deafening. I sat completely frozen in my ergonomic chair. It wasn't just poor financial management. It wasn't just blind, misguided favoritism toward Cressida. It was a highly calculated, deeply predatory, genuinely sociopathic conspiracy. My own mother and father intentionally, maliciously plotted to destroy my financial future. They actively wanted to ruin my credit, steal my youth, and keep me in a state of permanent, exhausted poverty so I would remain their unquestioning financial slave forever. They actively plotted to steal my future so I could never afford a home, never afford a wedding, never afford a life of my own. A much younger version of me, the desperate little girl who just wanted her mother to look at her debate trophy, might have broken down and cried hysterically at that horrifying revelation. She might have screamed at the ceiling. She might have asked the universe, why me? But that girl officially died at the dinner table. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical, profound disgust. I did not cry. I did not reply to the letter. I did not call Cressida to angrily verify the horrifying details. I simply stood up from my chair. I picked up the lined notebook paper and the small black USB drive. I walked deliberately over to the heavy-duty corporate paper shredder humming quietly in the corner of my office. I fed the letter directly into the sharp metal teeth. I watched the cheap paper be instantly destroyed, shredded into 100 completely unrecognizable pieces. Then, I placed the USB drive on the floor, lifted the heel of my expensive leather shoe, and stomped down as hard as I could, violently crushing the plastic casing and snapping the memory board in half. I kicked the broken pieces into the trash can. The physical destruction of that confession was the final, necessary act of my internal cleansing. I realized in that exact moment that keeping their dark secrets, carrying their heavy shame, and endlessly analyzing their toxic, evil motivations was just another subtle way of letting them control my mind. By shredding the confession and refusing to engage, I was formally, permanently resigning from the horrific role they had violently forced upon me. I was no longer the tragic victim of their cruel scheme. I was the powerful, untouchable architect of their ultimate consequence. They were dead to me. Completely, legally, and emotionally dead. The incredible, highly dramatic story of my sudden, unprecedented execution of the West Coast distressed debt portfolio and the absolutely ruthless, legally flawless way I handled my own family's financial ruin began to circulate rapidly in the elite corporate circles of Chicago. I became a legend in the private equity world. I was known as the strategist who possessed zero blind spots. The woman who could not be manipulated, intimidated, or bought. 6 months later, Alaric called me into his office and offered me a full partnership at the firm. I was 29 years old. I was the youngest partner in the entire history of the company. I accepted the offer, securing a multi-million-dollar equity share that permanently guaranteed I would never, ever have to worry about survival again. I heard through the corporate grapevine right before I completely and permanently changed my phone number and erased my public footprint that my parents' situation had deteriorated exactly as I intended. Harrison and Lenora were currently living in a cramped, incredibly run-down apartment in a highly undesirable neighborhood. Their wages were aggressively garnished every single month to pay back the massive corporate debt they still owed my firm. They had no cars. They had no luxury vacations. They were completely isolated. Cressida, completely stripped of her luxury car, her endless allowance, and her protective shield, had entirely vanished from the internet. The golden child was finally, painfully introduced to the unforgiving reality of the real world, pouring coffee for minimum wage, terrified of her own shadow. They had desperately tried to bury me alive under the suffocating weight of their expectations, their manipulation, and their relentless greed. But they did not realize I was an incredibly resilient seed, and the immense pressure they applied only forced me to grow stronger, violently breaking through the heavy dirt to finally reach the light. One quiet Friday evening, a full year after the explosive, life-altering confrontation in the corporate conference room, I stepped out onto the expansive private balcony of my incredible new penthouse apartment overlooking the Chicago River. The vibrant city skyline pulsed softly and beautifully beneath a cool layer of evening mist. Theron was standing next to me. We were celebrating my official elevation to partner. I held a heavy crystal glass of incredibly expensive, aged bourbon. The exact kind of high-end liquor my father used to drink to feel important while spending my money. But I bought this specific bottle with my own money, earned entirely through my own brilliance and grueling hard work. I leaned comfortably against the thick glass railing, letting the cool, damp, incredibly refreshing air settle against my skin. The massive city glimmered brightly below, a beautiful scatter of gold and blue lights perfectly reflecting off the dark, calm water. The world felt incredibly vast, entirely open, and for the very first time in my entire life, it felt full of genuine, limitless possibility. "You know," Theron said quietly, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Most people who go through the level of psychological warfare you survived end up completely broken. They spend years in therapy just trying to function. How did you manage to take all that trauma and turn it into an empire?" I turned my head and looked at him. I thought deeply about the greasy diner where I scrubbed floors. I thought about the freezing, unheated college apartment. I thought about the canceled bank transfers, the shredded confession letter, and the sheer, unadulterated look of absolute panic on my mother's face when she realized I owned her debt. I smiled. It was not an arrogant smile. It was a genuine, quiet, deeply peaceful smile. "Resilience is absolutely not something you are magically born with, Theron," I said slowly, choosing my words with absolute precision. "It is something you are violently forced to build, brick by brick, when the ground underneath you constantly, aggressively shifts. You quickly learn to be entirely unshakable when you finally realize that the only person coming to save you from drowning is you." I took a slow sip of the bourbon. Surviving the profound betrayal of the people who were biologically supposed to love and protect you is the real, agonizing work. Once you win the fierce custody battle over your own sanity, No corporate lawsuit, no hostile takeover, and no arrogant CEO can ever scare you. Complex corporate business is incredibly easy compared to toxic family trauma. I looked back out at the glowing city. I thought of the exhausted, deeply desperate young woman who spent years trying to earn basic, fundamental affection from cruel people who treated love like a cold financial transaction. That young woman was entirely, permanently gone now. She had been laid to rest. In her place stood someone steadier, harder, vastly more intelligent, and undeniably completely whole. I had meticulously built a massive fortress around my inner peace, and the thick stone walls were entirely impenetrable. I was absolutely not wishing for my parents to call. I was not secretly hoping for a miraculous, tearful apology that would never, ever come. I was simply breathing, steady, completely unhurried, and finally, absolutely free from their toxic chains. Maybe I was never the obedient, sacrificial, completely broken daughter they desperately wanted me to be. But through their horrific cruelty, I became the fiercely independent, entirely unbreakable woman I desperately needed to be. And the massive empire I am building now belongs to absolutely no one but me. Many people say that blood is thicker than water. They say that no matter what, you have to forgive your family because they are the only family you have. They say that driving your own flesh and blood into total bankruptcy and homelessness is a step too far, an act of unforgivable cruelty. But when your family consists of parasites who actively plot to destroy your future just to fund their own delusions, is cutting them off and enforcing the ultimate consequences really a sin? If you were standing in my expensive leather shoes, holding the legal deed to the complete financial ruin of the people who stole your life, would you have shown them mercy? Or would you have pulled the trigger, liquidated their assets, and walked away into the sunset just like I did? Share your story and your verdict in the comments below. And if you believe in absolute, undeniable karma, do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the Payback Diaries so you never miss the next incredible journey of ultimate revenge. Thank you for watching, and remember, protect your peace at all costs.